I am Ben Doc Askins, the psychedelic science war storyteller, and this is the Anti-Hero's Journey podcast. What's going on, Anti-Hero's Journey podcast listeners? Coming at you with another interview podcast with my new best friend, Dr. Lincoln Stoller. We're going to have a conversation and we're just going to see where it goes. I sent him a message on LinkedIn. We talked for 30 seconds before this and I pushed record, and now we're going to have some fun and see what happens. So welcome to the podcast. Do you want me to call you Lincoln? Do you want me to call you Dr. Stoller? What are
Lincoln's fun.
Lincoln's fun.
Lincoln.
Okay, fantastic. So let's see. You're coming up on a big anniversary tomorrow, right?
No. Tomorrow? Not that I know of. Let me know. What is it?
15 years ago tomorrow, you smoked Salvia divinorum for the first time in a hotel in San Antonio with 3 psychologists. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that experience was quite amazing. Very dark, very negative. But I really understand suicide now, because I think I can there's all these levels to suicide, ideation, taking action, feeling depressed, many ways. But in that experience, I reached what I felt was the final suicide stage. So I would have killed myself, no questions asked, if I was stuck in that reality. But I couldn't, because it wasn't a physical reality. And it didn't last long. But I feel I can talk above any person who has suicidal ideation. I can tell them where they're going to go. And I can understand where they'd go. And, I could even go as far as saying, if you really feel like that, I completely understand your desire to kill yourself. So that was an interesting experience. I didn't expect it. Salvia is supposed to be the wise teacher. Well, it was wise, but it was a 2x4 in terms of teaching. Yeah. It's not what you get in any book. And it is similar to, so since you have a military background, it is similar to an extreme, hellish, physical experience.
Sure.
Which usually gives people, PTSD. But it's hard to have PTSD with a psychedelic experience unless you really fuck up, and get no support and go off the rails and have some psychotic experience. So it was great, sort of.
It was great. It felt like you looked into the abyss and the abyss looked back, it sounds like.
Oh, it punched me in the face. Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't just look, yeah.
Well, now when you look at someone, in your therapy practices who's acutely or chronically suicidal, it sounds like you've got an intensely different perspective than maybe the average clinician.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, because I've had the average clinician training, which I feel is insipid, and it doesn't get anywhere close.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if I was talking to a suicidal person, I would be right next to them. I would say, what the fuck is really happening in your head? I wouldn't sort of, get these contracts of, don't hurt yourself and stuff like that.
Try to get to the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of what's going on.
That's obviously what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Or wish they didn't have to, but are. Anyway, so, yeah, I don't have many people like that. And I've never had anyone actually suicidal on me or who's killed themselves all in my practice or outside. Okay. But I've had people who were very depressed and self-destructive.
Sure.
And I think that is in that realm, sort of.
Yeah, you mentioned that the sort of experience that you had has some analogies to, combat stress and post-traumatic stress. But it sounds like maybe in a converse way, not post-traumatic stress so much as like there's terms get thrown around like post-traumatic resilience or post-traumatic growth. Does any of
Oh,
that
that's interesting. I haven't
connect?
heard those, but I can, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of experience as a mountaineer, which is really interesting. It's very similar to psychedelics.
Yeah.
It's an altered state experience. It's an extreme and often unpleasant experience. Um, People don't understand why climbers climb. It's not to have fun. That's the reward, but it's, in a
Yeah. Why
funny
do you
way,
do it? Because it's there.
well, it's off. It's hard to say. It's to suffer is the reason. It's why a penitent flagellates themselves.
Uh-huh.
You feel better afterwards, that's for sure. And sometimes you feel better in the process. But it's interesting that in that space of extreme sports, we find a lot of ex-soldiers who are trying to recover the extreme experience they had somewhere. And it's clearly not a uh, negative experience they're trying to recall, although everyone else would think it is negative, being in a firefight, but some sort of sense of resilience. I remember talking to an Army Ranger who said that, in the heat of battle, we have complete respect for our enemy. You know, they are not adversaries to us physically. I mean, it's very hard to explain. They have complete respect for their adversary. There's no anger or hatred involved. It's just some sort of transcendent experience. And of course, they'd kill him in a minute because that's what you'd have to do, but it's sort of transcendent. And so that is similar to mountaineering in its transcendence, and it's similar to psychedelics in its altered state. And so the question of resilience and meaning and this is the point. In the psychedelic space, nothing makes sense.
Hmm.
And that's the essential importance of that space, to get out of what makes sense and get into what's real. Because reality doesn't make sense. The
Yeah.
sense is something we lay on top of it sometimes.
What do
So,
you think? Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was about to ask you to reel me back in.
Well, I was going to ask you, what do you think compels us to go to the mountains, to go to war, to go into psychedelic spaces? What is it about being a person that throws us into those pursuits?
Well, that's a different answer for different people at different levels. I think the most clear-headed person is looking for themselves, and the least clear-headed person is looking to satisfy their needs and doesn't quite know what they're getting into. You hear similar stories from veterans as you would hear from cancer survivors. Um, and the story is often, at least the ones who survive, is a story of resilience and meaning. You may not have known you were looking for that at first. Look, a lot of my therapy clients, they don't exactly know what they're looking for. They have an underlying sense of disquiet and dissatisfaction. And it's been ongoing, and maybe they've been chronically depressed or, intermittently suicidal, who knows. Like I say, I think it's almost amusing to have a suicidal thought, to bring it up, when you're feeling like shit and you're depressed, say to yourself, I want to kill myself, and then laugh at it because it's just such an overreaction, and it's always an overreaction. I mean, that's almost what PTSD is defined as, an overreaction. So, I I think healthy people are always looking for meaning. It's healthy to look for meaning. And when you look for it, you open this sort of Pandora's box of, human nonsense that goes easily to darkness and struggle and strife and historical, like lineage problems. They could be cultural, racial prejudice or hatred or, religious animosity, or just the little microcosm of our family. It's so typical that siblings are, at each other's throats, and no one's parents are sufficiently supportive. This is sort of the microcosm, and then we
Right.
create this in our society, and we get Big Brother and Donald Trump and the mean Donald Trump is like the mean Uncle Sam, and
What
some people love it.
what do you what have you found to be some of the most meaningful ways to move from meaninglessness to meaningfulness?
Um, Ways to do it. Well,
Yeah,
certainly
like
throwing yourself.
war's one, mountain climbing's another, psychedelics are another, but
Psychedelics are another.
reliably meaningful. Yeah.
Well, I think counseling should be reimagined as a transformative process rather than a, you know, silver bullet for your, daily problems. And it should be an educational process. I'm also a sort of advocate of real education as opposed to state-sponsored, socialization.
Sure.
Um, so, growth mentoring can be a great experience. Yeah, I wrote this book called The Learning Project, which was sort of answers or addresses your question. At
Hmm.
some point in my life, this was around the year 2000, I looked back and said, why did the people who succeeded or who I felt succeed? What did they do right? How did they get to their position? Some of those positions were sort of exalted and you couldn't exactly figure out how they got there. So I decided to go back and ask them, people whose experience I hadn't been in contact with, but I hadn't known to ask at the time. And I thought, this could be a book just about, exceptional people talking about their bios, and that was not enough. So I wanted to talk about it to middle-aged people who were still struggling to build themselves, and that was not enough. So I also wanted to talk to young people who were just encountering their life and their questions and ask them all the same questions. So I divided the book into three groups: young, teenagers, middle-aged, 30s, 40s, and seniors, 60s, 70s, 80s,
Hmm.
90s. Um, and I asked them all, how did you learn and what did you gain from it? And, why was it important? And these were picked as unusual people to begin with. So I knew I wasn't going to get just sort of bingo on Wednesday night thing. And it was very interesting. The interviews were conducted over a decade. Most of these people I knew, at least the older people, were my mentors. The younger people I didn't, but I could relate to, had some contact with. And, they gave three different answers to your questions. The young people basically said, I throw myself into the world in as rich and opportunistic way as I can find, meaningful. The middle-aged people, it's hard to summarize everybody because these were deep spiritual questions to 30 unique people. But I summarized the middle level as saying we need to learn to love ourselves. So you can imagine at first it's like sort of like the fool's journey. So here you are again, right? Um, First you throw yourself into the world and then you learn, if you can, self-respect, resilience, self-love, which has got to be the root to anything you offer anyone else. And then the older people were kind of bemused and reflective and spiritual in a way that they said, well, you know, you you try not to do evil in the world, and you try to be constructive and enlighten people. And that was their answer for their own personal meaning. And I thought that was a great um, summary. So I wrote the book. And I'm amused that very few people read it. But, that's kind of a marketing thing. Uh, it's too
Well,
long. Publishers wouldn't take it.
yeah.
It's
Let
too
me do the
bizarre.
marketing thing real fast then. So your website's mindstrengthbalance.com, and then the learning project is on the website for free. You sent me a chapter with it was a young, at the time, man named Dave Williamson, who was a combat medic in Iraq. I was stunned by how much he and I have in common, down to some of the details there, when you sent me that particular chapter. And then I started looking through it quite a bit, which was when I figured out your Salvia Divinorum
That was at the end.
anniversary was coming up. I'm not psychic, for everybody out there that's
Interesting.
listening or whatever. You put that in the book, and I just remembered it, just to clarify that. But you interview some incredibly interesting, well-known people, and then some incredibly interesting, not well-known people throughout. And I think any of my listeners that can read should go to your website and read the entire book. Start wherever you want, it seems like, and you could
Yeah, you
just
can.
track out through the network of all of the different chapters relating art and science and wrestling and a whole bunch of different categories that you sort of sort out by topic and by age set and by personality. You interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson and Banksy, the street artist, and I forget
Well,
who
not
else was on
Banksy.
this list.
Nobody interviewed
Yeah, sure.
Banksy, but
Banksy adjacent.
right.
Everybody's Banksy adjacent and nobody's Banksy, which is some of the fun part of all of that story, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear you expound on the book from your perspective now, having written it. I think everybody should go read it, but
It's
I
also
just
printed.
started to dip my toe into it this morning, and I want to finish it as soon as I can.
Well, that's the point. It's free online. It's buried in the education section of my website called The Learning Project. It's free online as a hypertext that you can click through. It's also printed, and it's a digital book too. It's not. I didn't recite it. I would have a hard time reciting other people's verbal presentation. But there
Sure.
are a number. If you haven't seen them yet, but there are a bunch of almost a dozen of the recorded interviews online. And there's,
Okay.
I have to digress for a moment. I have a lot of experience with brain training, neurophysiology and neuropsychology, and there is an underlying aspect to all this, spirit, presence, resilience, that's neurological. So some people are just wired in a hair trigger way. And in fact, PTSD is often something that it creates a hair trigger reaction to situations that require a broader encounter, a more sedate encounter. And this tuning of your brain is neurological. You get pushed into it by events and trauma, certainly, but you can learn it, train it, and to some extent see it through various kinds of brain training, which most simply, in this very simplest sense, is like meditation. It's self-reflection. It's separating yourself from your process. So I'm now asking all of my therapy clients, and I am remembering your question, and I'll get back to it, about the book. I am telling all my therapy clients to look into brain training as is available through various cheap home devices in the $200 to $400 range, and to try to educate them on why they would want to do this and what it will feel like when they do, because it's very subtle. It's like growing up. You don't actually notice it happening. You just find yourself different after you do it. It is like putting on a pair of glasses. Well, no, that's too dramatic. It's more like, it's just like waking up feeling better tomorrow. You don't exactly know what happened or why. It's just like irritations don't bother you and positive thoughts are more prevalent. And you don't know who to give credit to because there's no one to give credit to. It's just the way your brain is rebalanced. Why did I digress? Because it's important. And it's
It sounds like
overlooked.
1% better for 100 days is 100% better. Is
That's
kind
right.
of a
That's
way
right.
of parsing
That's
it out. Yeah.
nice. Yeah. So I went, so back to this book. The book wasn't a question as to what people do to grow and improve. And as you mentioned, I asked traumatized people and mentally disabled people and physically disabled people, people of all cultures, races, genders, because I didn't really know. I didn't want to prejudice the answer with any one of those genders, races, religions, cultures. And I wanted to see what came through them all, through the ages. And the biggest difference was age, right? So the young people were the most resilient. You could say ignorant in a factual sense, but, also inspiring, definitely inspiring. And the middle-aged people were, as you'd think, sort of self-absorbed in their profession or their self-identity. And the older people were reflective and disengaged and more in the mode of offering. But meaning was always personal. And, to summarize the whole project and to summarize life in general, you see, this is almost criminal to reduce life to a sentence. But, to learn to love yourself was the sentence that came through it all after, a lifetime of mentorship and studenthood and 10 years of research and 400 pages of writing, to learn to love yourself. And that was told to me by a middle-aged black woman who was a biologist, gay, and now she's transgender. So this makes her of nothing like myself, who is none of those things. I'm not a biologist. I'm not black. I'm not transgender, gay, or whatever. But that's what I liked about this book. It really cut through all those levels and got down to that explanation. So what is it when a person who's so different from you tells you that they need, and we all need to learn to love ourselves, what does it mean? I don't know what it means. I really don't know. And the more I think about it, I'm not sure I'm getting any closer to it. But I try to tell that to my clients. And the ones who are struggling the most seem to be struggling with that, the ones with addiction and self-harm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, addiction is a form of self-harm, I believe. It's partly coping, but when it becomes a problem, sure, it's harming.
Alcohol's a toxin. There's plenty of other toxins, right? It's a kind of self-harm.
Yeah, I work with people who find as many toxins as possible, right? It's typical, right. Snorting, sure, shooting, drinking, all at once.
You mention in portions of the Learning Project book that you were a somewhat precocious individual in the younger stage of your life, that you were kind of moving out on your own by your teens, traveling to meet new mentors and learning about science there. It seems like you broke things out into these age sets. It reminded me of the Maasai tribe in East Africa. I spent a little bit of time with them, and they break their society out into the junior warriors, the senior warriors, the junior elders, and the senior elders. And you just kind of parse that into 3 stages where they've got 4, but it seems very similar. And it also seems like maybe you were a bit ahead of the curve on each of those stages from an outsider's perspective, looking at the book. That may have led you down the path of writing it. But what's your own perception on your own story in that regard?
Hard to say exactly, but I do agree that I always was pedaling. I was pedaling forward, and I was unsatisfied. And it's funny, the things you blame are often the things you end up crediting. So I blame my mother for ignoring me, and that made me want to go out and connect with people. And then I was dissatisfied with the inadequate connections people were offering. So that was kind of my whole life's motivation: connect and deepen in every encounter. And it's pretty easy to go beyond what people are offering. I was never so overt and social as to be a performer. Well, I'm not sure that's really authentic. I don't know. I'm not a performer. So I always felt I needed to do more to show myself or get myself known or get a reaction. So, like in high school, all those sad and pathetic attempts to make connections with women, there were girls and I was a boy. Oh, it was so frustrating. Oh, and then you've got, your erection constantly. It's almost cruel the way it's been organized biochemically. You're so unprepared for this, and society is so unhelpful. And I would say that contributed too. It made me, I guess, angry. Anger can be a great motivator. It made me want to connect, to understand, and be unsatisfied. So I would walk around in 8th grade carrying, copies of Dante and other books because I wanted people to know that I didn't want to read Johnny Tremaine and Little Home on the Prairie. I thought that was offensive. And people laughed at me. And, I tried to do various things. So I did push ahead even as a young person. And I was also helped by the misfortune of being somewhat an only child because my siblings were 10 years and 12 years older than me, which made me irrelevant to them. They weren't going to fight with me. They weren't interested in doing that. So I was kind of alone. And then I had this sort of a negligent mother, not negligent as in absent. She was absent. She was emotionally absent. She did what she could, but she couldn't do much. So, it formed me into a person who was always climbing, metaphorically and physically. And that's where I found climbing, physically, mountaineering, to be rewarding, because now you're with people who have to be real, because they're holding your life on the end of the rope, and you got to trust them. Sometimes you don't trust them. And then the consequences are yours, no one else's. Your teacher is nature, and nature is a stern teacher, you could say,
Not completely indifferent, but almost.
Yeah, I mean, then you get spiritual. Do you want to talk to the trees? Yes, I do want to talk to these. I talk to all the trees. I don't presume they answer me. They don't answer me. Although once I did get an answer. I squeezed really hard. I wanted to hear a voice speak to me. Oh, on two occasions. So the first occasion was, 1980. I was doing some spiritual training. I wanted to hear God. So God said something, and I don't know what God said. But I clearly knew.
What do you mean you don't know? He said something, but you don't know?
Yeah, because it was just an illusion of interaction. Okay. And that's what I was looking for. I don't know what they said. It's like, eat your lunch or something. And then the second one was, when I was making psychedelics from plants in my neighborhood, which I had been told was possible. And it is possible because the chemicals are common root hormones. But they're not pure, and they're not all for human consumption. So I poisoned myself.
Oh.
And that's when I had the second voice, which said to me, "What the fuck are you doing here?" or it wasn't quite as hostile. It said, "What are you doing here? You're in the wrong place." And I was having, that was a toxic experience, physically toxic. Mentally,
Did you answer them? Like, did you explain yourself? What were you doing?
I sort of did. I sort of said, I guess I made a mistake, That's how you learn. But that's also how a lot of people die. So I decided that wasn't, a lot of those witch ointments are very toxic. And you're not supposed to play with them for good reason.
Yeah, I'm unsurprised that witch ointments are toxic, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I don't know what the witches were trying to do. And I don't even believe in witches, but, the herbalists or the out there herbalists who are doing psychedelic toxins. I mean, some people learn to manage these things. I've talked to people in, Eastern adepts of Eastern religion who say they learned to master datura, which is highly toxic. And I mean, I touched it a little bit just to see where the toxic level was. And enough of that. I didn't need to go there with my ignorance. That would be a bad combination. Okay. So, but datura is a beautiful plant. If you want to talk to plants, it's a great place to start.
Okay.
These huge bellflowers that are fragrant as hell.
You've mentioned, you mentioned a bit about being the youngest, being a decade or so behind all of your older siblings and being angry at your mom for some of what sounds like a lot of loneliness early on. And then in your salvia experience, you also described some pretty intense feelings of being alone, like the
Yeah.
suicide versus anti-suicidal line that you wound up walking there. What what are your thoughts on how to address the simple fact of loneliness that we all experience?
Mm. I'm still working on that. I think a couple answers. Have kids and be really good to them because that makes
I
you
like
feel
that answer a lot. I've got
they
four,
need.
so I
Yeah, they
like that
need
answer a
you,
lot.
and so you can be a real hero, which isn't entirely healthy, but at least it meets the need of feeling
I
needed.
agree. I
Um,
agree.
and it puts you in a very educational point of view because you have to learn to disengage because to be helpful you can't be cloying and helicopter mom. That's not simple either how to do that. And I think the other answer is getting involved in loving relationships. Wait a minute, let me back off because we all want loving relationships, but I think the only thing you can do is give a loving relationship. You can't expect to get one. And it inevitably becomes a combat experience. I hate
Mm.
to say it, but so many people, almost everyone's romantic relationships turn into combat experiences. Very few are, perfect relationships, and that's how you learn to find love is by battling for it. So I'm becoming a therapist. I encourage everyone. Of course, we all are therapists. We think we are, but to be a real therapist, you have to put your needs aside. That's
Mm-hmm.
my job. I have to put my needs aside. It's of course impossible to fully put your needs aside,
Mm-hmm.
but um, to try to live in somebody else's shoes uh, as authentically as possible, and to understand their needs and suffering. That's educational. That's why I consider my therapeutic profession as a continuation of my education.
I hear you saying, um, in addressing loneliness, there are these sort of poles of, giving maximally. Like
Hmm.
that's what, making a child and then
Giving.
raising them involves is this maximum effort of giving, but also this uh, difficult balance to strike of self denial and no self and stepping out of the way in being a therapist. And then that there's this sort of battle in the middle in love relationships to try to navigate. And we kind of fall off the horse to the left and then fall off the horse to the right. And every once in a while, we get to stay in the saddle.
Yeah, it sounds like you stay in the saddle. It sounds like your relationship is, two people on the same horse for
Uh, I think
a
that's because I
nice
married
case.
up. That was all that was more than anything else. Was
What does
I
marrying up mean? What up where?
yeah.
Up.
She's just at a level above mine that stays committed at a level that I just try to keep up with.
Okay, let me
Uh,
say that too. I think that's another big buzzword for me, commitment.
yeah.
People are, see, this comes to mountaineering too. Mountaineering was all about commitment to me. Making
Uh huh.
connection with people was all about commitment. Marriage and love is all about commitment. And I think people they don't recognize how committed they need to be. You're not here to have a good time.
Yeah.
You're here to grow into a better life form because human beings are not very good life forms. I mean, just look around. They've been slaughtering each other by the millions. That's not a very good life form. It's not even
For
very.
nothing.
It's stupid. It's almost stupid, or maybe it is
Hmm.
stupid. And so, improving that is why we're here, I believe. And it's not an easy job, and
Hmm.
it's not going to necessarily make you happy. And you're going to carry the baggage of your own suffering, and you're going to deal with it and repeat it. and, recreate it reasonably in your attempts to solve it. And I do. And I think my clients do. And the lesson is that you have to find higher guidance. I don't know what that is. We call it religious, spiritual, inner strength, inner guides, whatever. I don't care what it is. Find it anywhere. Find it in extreme trial or love. But at the point you find it, you'll find it something you have to give. It doesn't rely and it doesn't assure reward. And it's just, it sounds Buddhist or Christian or whatever. I think that's where these religions are trying to tell you to go, to sacrifice for the betterment of others. And I think that's the only real answer to addressing loneliness. But it's not the answer most people want. They want satisfaction. And it's not quite satisfaction. It's the satisfaction of serving,
It sounds to me like you're saying that on a balance, give more than you take is a way of trying to address some of the history of our nature that's red in tooth and claw. Is that an accurate thing that I'm picking up on?
I think so. I'm not satisfied. I feel like, in the panoply of gods, I'm channeling a particular one. I'm not channeling the highest deity of, samadhi. I'm channeling the service deity, Ganesha or something.
Okay.
And so I can't say it's right for everyone, but it seems to be my path. A path of service and creativity and struggle. So who would want that? Maybe some people would. But, it's been my most rewarding answer.
Sometimes you choose the struggles and sometimes the struggles choose you, right?
Something like that. What do you think?
Well, what would it look like to channel the highest God? You mentioned that, and I was like, what would that even look like?
Well, my experience with psychedelics, and you've probably had it too, is that you can get to these places where you just don't know what's going on. It's just too big. It's like awe-inspiring. And I've been to those places. And I remember I said, this was like multidimensional and multi-textural and multi-sensory, and I was completely overwhelmed. I couldn't see it, feel it. It was like traveling through infinity. And I said to myself, I will remember. I will remember. And that's the only thing I remember, is saying, I will remember. Right? Because it was an ineffable experience. I have nothing to hang it on. All I can remember is being overwhelmed. And that's all I can say. Contacting the ultimate is never going to be within any intellectual domain that you can talk about. I don't think.
The things whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent, the way
maybe
ends Tractatus sort of idea, or something.
Not necessarily, because we don't know what he was talking about.
Right, because he said it.
Because it's an experiential thing. And like the young people in the book are the most inspiring, because they're the ones who are willing to take the leap of faith into chaos. And I do encourage people to learn to manage chaos. Chaos is the root firmament of fertile experience. It's never going to be organized and neat. Because if you're this is the nature of learning. You're trying to outpace yourself. You're trying to go to somewhere you've never been. That's why, a firefight or a mountain, and I've been buried in avalanches and fallen off mountains, and those have been epiphanies. They could also have been fatal, but I managed to make them not. They were smaller avalanches and safer falls, but they were big. They were still big.
Yeah.
Way big, just not as big.
Was it a big enough avalanche you didn't know which way was up?
Oh, that's absolutely. Oh, it was very funny.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
saw this cloud coming down the mountain, and then all of a sudden the cloud came over the hill, and it wasn't a
yep,
cloud anymore. It was
yeah,
huge. And
yeah,
then and then I was buried.
yeah.
But as in both of my extreme experience, I was laughing all the way.
Yeah.
I've often laughed
Yep.
while falling or being
Yep.
buried, and that's
I've
very
decked twice
important.
on two long whippers climbing, and yeah, laughed the whole way to the bottom.
Yeah, because you can't get traumatized if you're laughing. I don't think that's so. That's my prescription for
Uh,
enlightenment. Go kill
I want to hear
yourself
more
and
about
laugh.
this, like
I don't know.
trauma-proof laughter. I like that idea. Tell me more. Tell me a joke, Doc.
Well, I don't exactly understand it. Another experience is if you know anything about mountaineering, often you're climbing on stuff that's not very stable. Because
Right.
mountains are mountains. Frozen dirt. So climbing on
Rock and
ice,
ice.
ice is typically unpredictable. It's all different kinds of structures, crystalline temperatures, fragility. And I just remember climbing with a friend who was really sketchy, really freaking out, really strung out on a long lead, and he started to quake, and I could see him up
Yeah.
there shaking, and he started to pray to his Christian gods, and
Sure.
he was crying,
Hmm.
and I just thought it was the funniest thing. I couldn't contain myself. um, it was like it was like Coen Brothers movie amplified. Uh, and that's the kind of headspace you have to get in.
Yeah.
It's absurd. Life is absurd, the situation absurd, your decisions were absurd, the consequences are totally off the wall. And you can react with terror and horror, or you can just laugh at it.
Yeah.
And I
How,
don't know how
how do
you
you
do
get
it.
to yeah, that's what I want to like. I want to help people get to where they're able to laugh at the worst things. And I don't know what the best way to go about that is. Like, how do you get to that place
Well,
where
that's a good question.
you
I
laugh
think
in
I'll
the
try
face of
that.
death?
Uh, uh, exactly. I've been trying to do it. So I do say, like, brain training tunes your triggers. So clearly, one thing is you want to tune the triggers away so that you're not triggered by fear and terror and horror and various other negative things. So you do want to have a certain equanimity as a basis. You know, um, I use hypnosis as a way to invoke people's terror and fear and voices and have them, or at least I ask them, to speak to them, to speak to themselves, to separate from their emotions and then encounter their emotions as separate personalities, because I believe they are,
Hmm.
and then speak to them. So, you know, who is the Steve Martin in you? He's a ridiculous personality.
Sure.
Or
The
Robin
jerk.
Williams, who was a pathetic personality, I would have to say, since he ended up hanging himself.
Hmm.
Um, so that combination of humor and tragedy is sort of where we're going. How do you bring it out? I guess the answer is you have to see it in your life and you have to invite it to be present. And then you have to make an arrangement for how you're going to align yourself or ally yourself with it so that it's not one of these monsters that's lurking um, somewhere in your past or your lineage or your culture. Uh, I do say that demons are malevolent entities that have a message to deliver to you. They're malevolent, they're unhappy, you're not going to make friends with them. They don't want your help and they're not going to be your friend, but they have a message to deliver to you. And you have to encounter and accept that message. What is that message? Message of hopelessness, tragedy, grief. It's a message. It's not who you are. It's not who they are. They're just demons. They're delivering you a message from a kind of hell, and it's an educational message. How do you take it? And how do you appreciate it? See, these are all very contradictory. We're on the path for, I guess you'd call, enlightenment of sorts, liberation, certainly. And it involves engaging with what you want to not be, or what you in your lineage have been, bad human features. How do you overcome bad human features? Well, you have to heal them. And as a medic, you don't heal things by denying them and being uninvolved. You get your hands dirty. Dirty is not the right word. You get your hands covered in blood of
It's
a
dirty
kind.
at least.
Yeah, it's not, the implications of these words is so full of negativity. But it's healing, right? So, you get involved, and sometimes you succeed, and you try to succeed, and there are all kinds of obstacles like infections and trauma and decay and stuff. So you get involved. You get involved with the dirt. You get involved. Oh, one of the people I interviewed, the youth in my outdoor segment of this book, said in her nature training, they taught her to build shelters and keep warm with nothing by creating a big pile of leaves and burying yourself in the leaves as a way to stay warm. And she said, she buried herself in these leaves, and she had all these dreams of the sufferings of her friends. And she said, I learned so much being in that pile of leaves, which is a very important thing. It's not by going to school. It's not by getting degrees. It's not by, being recognized. It's just by, in her case, spending a night freezing in a pile of leaves. You have to be open to that. And so here I am. I'm speaking from the point of view of a penitent, almost. I sound like a penitent, that I have something to make up for. But that's been my experience. I've learned the most in every group that I've been thrown out of. That's you graduate not with a degree, you graduate with a kick in the ass. That's when you've learned all you have to learn from that group, when they throw you out. Not necessarily all, but all they have to teach you. I've still got a lot to learn from these groups, but I'll have to take it my own way. Sorry, that's the best I can answer.
No, I think it's a thorough answer, if not comprehensive, right? I appreciate it. I think I have a friend who likes to say that hurt people, and heal people, heal people. And there's a process that you have to go through, right? Like if you haven't had the experience of being able, or even witnessing someone else laugh in the face of danger, or whatever you want to say about it, it's unimaginable. That mystery is terrifying to you, and we've been taught and evolved to fear the places where the dragons are, right? And all of from the literal to the highest metaphorical levels. And I just think that maybe the way forward is to embody some of that way of being for people to witness, so that they don't have to imagine it for themselves for the first time. Like I take my kids on a roller coaster and they're terrified, and I laugh the entire time. And by the third time that we ride the roller coaster, they're laughing right along with me. Unimaginable to them that their bodies could fly through space that fast, and absolutely terrifying. But it doesn't take a whole lot of times on the roller coaster riding with dad, laughing like a maniac, before they're laughing like a maniac too.
Well, I try to do that. I mean, that's easy. And it's fun. And I agree with you. And, mountaineering and climbing can do that too in a nice day, something that's scary with a lot of support and encouragement. You can get over it and feel very accomplished and satisfied with yourself. It's a little harder with self-destructive people who are recreating for themselves their legacy of hurt through other hurtful people. So you could turn that aphorism around, say that hurtful people start the healing process too. And so what I'm trying to do with those people is I'm trying to say, you have to talk to your hurt. You have to more than personalize, personify it. You have to make it into, you have to see it as the person that it is. Your hurt, injured, self-injurious person has something. I'm getting back to what I said before. It is demonic. It is not happy. It is not going to be a friend of yours, but it has something to tell you. Your hurting self has something to tell you. You can do something for it. Maybe it'll go away. Maybe it will take its message or feel satisfied that you've got the message, but it's trying to tell you something. So it's like, AA says, I'm not a big AA supporter, but you have to go to the bottom, right? You have to get to the bottom, at least, of the message. If you're torturing and hurting yourself, I say turn around and stop running from it and head straight toward it. You could use the support, I would advise, of a counselor to tell you, to hold the rope in that sense, to tell you when enough is enough, and, you can take a breather and think about something else for a week. But to encourage you to encounter what your negativity is exfolding. I mean, it's like infection. It's got to come out. So I don't know. It sounds like bullshit if you take it too literally. But if you're in it, it may make more sense.
Well, you get an infection and you need to lance it, right? You got to cut it open.
Yeah.
And they call surgery the diabolical art because, like, the Greek root for diabolos was tear apart or pull apart or split something, right? So you split something open, and you're talking about demons and, narcissists and, mean, evil people to some degree still have something to teach you. Cutting somebody with a knife is generally illegal until you have a medical license to do it in a very specific way. And then you wind up, stitching them back up afterwards in a very specific way. And the opposite in the Greek, from what I understand, is symbolion, is putting back together or stitching back together, where we get our word symbol from. So the opposite of, diabolical in like old Greek etymology isn't, divine, it's symbolical. And I think that's the symbolic art. We've got lots of surgeons who know how to cut things apart and then stitch them back together in a literal way. But doing that sort of work at higher levels, if I can call them higher levels, or doing that sort of work for a whole person rather than just for the material piece that they inhabit, that seems a lot more complicated than getting the medical license to, handle a complex polytrauma in a war zone on a forward surgical team like your friend Dave Williamson.
Well, that's where I have to stop, because I have a client and I've got to talk to him, literally. And we have to pick this conversation up again.
I would love that.
And, you started not knowing where we're going, and we're ended not knowing where we're going. And I guess that's the right way to be.
We pulled a whole bunch of things apart, and we'll stitch them all back together on a different episode.
Yeah, let's do it. Maybe I don't know. I'm the best as a therapist when I know the least. Maybe I'm the best at everything when I know the least.
Paradoxes on paradoxes on paradoxes.
Well, that's the creative thing, it's chaos. If you want to... Oh, the last thing, the real definition of information is chaos, really. Something that can't be structured, cannot be reduced.
That's where we'll pick up in part 2.